The house is sold. You're homeless now. My mother-in-law said it like she was announcing the weather calm, cold, and strangely satisfied. Patricia stood beside my husband on our front porch, holding a thick stack of divorce papers against her chest. The late afternoon Colorado wind blew strands of her silver hair across her face. Daniel wouldn't even look at me. I stood frozen in the driveway, still holding my purse, still smiling from the drive home. Just an hour earlier, I had been crying happy tears behind the wheel. My grandmother Eleanor had left me $7 million and her estate in Aspen. I kept imagining Daniel lifting me off the ground when I told him. I imagined us finally breathing again after years of financial stress. Instead, I got this. The movers already came, Patricia continued. Your things are in storage. I blinked slowly. What? Daniel finally spoke. His voice flat and rehearsed. It's over, Claire. Over. 27 years of marriage reduced to 2 words from the man who once drove 6 hours through a snowstorm just to bring me soup when I had pneumonia. I looked past them at the house, the place I thought was ours. The flower pots I planted in spring were gone. The porch swing Daniel built 10 years ago had vanished. Even the curtains were different. This wasn't sudden. This had been planned. Carefully. Quietly. For weeks, maybe months. Patricia stepped down one stair and extended the papers toward me. You should sign while things are still civil. Civil. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. When were you going to tell me? Daniel rubbed his forehead like I was the exhausting one. Claire, don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder. I thought about the leather folder still sitting in my car, the copy of Eleanor's will. I thought about the attorney's handshake that morning. I thought about the quiet smile my grandmother used to give whenever Patricia's name came up. That smile made sense now. Patricia folded her arms. You'll land on your feet. Women always do. There was something almost impressive about how cruel she could be while sounding so practical. I had met Patricia when I was 34. She hated me before she even knew me. Never openly, she was too refined for that. Instead, she delivered tiny poisons wrapped in compliments for years. Oh, Claire, you're so independent. Some men don't like that forever. And Daniel always defended her. She doesn't mean it that way. That was the anthem of our marriage. Patricia glanced toward the street impatiently. You really should leave before the buyers arrive. Buyers. Daniel finally met my eyes. The house sold 3 days ago. 3 days ago, I had been sitting beside my grandmother's hospital bed, holding her hand as she struggled to breathe. 3 days ago, my husband was selling our home behind my back. Something inside me should have broken. But it didn't. Because at that exact moment I remembered something else. 3 months earlier, Grandma Eleanor sitting at her kitchen table in Aspen while snow fell outside the windows. Never let other people rush you into signing papers, she had told me. I had laughed. Grandma, you sound paranoid. No, she said calmly. I sound old. Patricia shoved the papers closer. You can sign now or later. Makes no difference to us. Not Daniel. That one word told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just a marriage ending. This was an extraction. And Patricia had been the architect. Daniel sighed. The house was under my name, Claire. Legally, there's nothing you can do. That sentence almost made me smile. Almost. Instead, I asked quietly. You sold it already? Yes. And finalized everything, Daniel said with a single nod. Patricia smirked. You always were too trusting. There it was. Not anger. Not even real heartbreak in her voice. Just pure contempt. They thought I was weak. Simple. Manageable. The funny thing is, up until that morning I probably had been. But that was before Eleanor's attorney slid those documents across the desk. Before I learned my grandmother had spent years quietly preparing for something I didn't fully understand yet. A strange calm washed over me. I looked up at the porch at my husband of 27 years and the woman who had spent nearly 3 decades trying to erase me from his life. Then I smiled. Real one. Daniel frowned. What's so funny? I glanced at the divorce papers in Patricia's hands, then at the house behind them. Softly, almost gently, I said, "Actually, the house you sold belonged to." Neither of them spoke. The wind moved through the trees above us. Patricia's expression flickered for the first time all afternoon. Just a hint of confusion. But it was enough. For the first time in 27 years, I wasn't the one about to lose everything. Patricia recovered quickly, of course. She always did. She gave a short, dismissive laugh and shoved the papers back toward Daniel. "Oh, please," she said. "Don't start with the dramatic nonsense." But Daniel kept staring at me. After 27 years, he knew my face. He knew when I was bluffing. This wasn't bluffing. I started walking toward the porch steps. Patricia immediately moved to block me. "You can't go inside. My coat is still in there." "We'll ship it," she said coldly. Ship it. Like I was already gone. Like I was already dead. For one brief second, pure anger flashed through me, not over the house, not even over Daniel, but over the humiliation. They had planned this so thoroughly that they packed my things before I even got home from my grandmother's will reading. Daniel shifted. "Claire, maybe we should talk privately." Patricia snapped her head toward him. "About what?" There it was again. Control. She wasn't even pretending anymore. I remembered something Grandma Eleanor once told me on her aspen porch while we drank tea. When a man stops thinking for himself, watch the woman speaking beside him. At the time, I thought she was being old-fashioned. Now those words hit differently. I stepped back. "That's fine," I said quietly. "I don't need the coat." Patricia crossed her arms. "Good." Then she added the line she had clearly rehearsed. "You should be grateful Daniel is handling this peacefully." Peacefully. Daniel finally looked uncomfortable. Not guilty, just uncomfortable. Like a man who realized the dinner reservation might turn awkward. That hurt more than yelling ever could. Because I knew the man standing there had once loved me deeply. The sound of a truck turning onto our street pulled me back to the present. Daniel glanced toward the road. Suddenly nervous, a black SUV rolled slowly toward the curb in front of the house. Patricia's expression changed instantly. "That's them," she muttered. "The buyers." I watched Daniel straighten his shirt nervously while Patricia forced a polished smile back onto her face. Two men stepped out. One was younger, likely an attorney. The other was around 70, wearing an expensive coat, with silver hair and the calm posture of a man who had entered tense rooms many times before. The older man looked directly at me first, not Daniel, not Patricia, me. Then he glanced at the house. "Interesting timing," he said. Daniel stepped forward quickly, extending his hand. "Daniel Whitmore. We spoke on the phone." The man shook it briefly. "Walter Bishop." His attorney opened a leather folder. Patricia immediately slipped into hostess mode. "We're just finishing a small family matter." Walter's eyes dropped to the divorce papers in Daniel's hands. "Yes," he said calmly. "I can see that." Something about his tone made my stomach tighten. He turned to me again. "You must be Claire." He nodded. Walter studied me for a long moment, then said the words that shifted the entire atmosphere. "Your grandmother spoke very highly of you." Daniel froze. Patricia blinked hard. Walter reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. My grandmother's elegant handwriting was unmistakable on the front. "She asked me to deliver this to you personally," he said, "but only under specific circumstances." The air grew thick. Even Patricia stayed silent. Walter continued. "She said if this house was ever sold without your full knowledge and consent," he paused, looking straight at Daniel, "there would likely be some confusion about ownership." Daniel let out a nervous laugh. "What confusion?" Walter ignored him and handed me the envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I took it. I recognized the handwriting immediately. "For Claire if Patricia finally gets her way." Daniel stepped closer. "Claire, what is that?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him. Really looked at the man I had trusted for nearly 30 years. Then at Patricia. For the first time since I'd known her, I saw real fear in her eyes. Walter's attorney spoke quietly. Before anyone moves into this property, we should discuss the trust agreement connected to the estate. Trust agreement, Patricia whispered. Daniel's face went pale. Walter removed his gloves calmly. No misunderstanding, I'm afraid. Patricia forced another artificial laugh. This is absurd. Daniel legally owned this property. Partially, the younger attorney corrected. Partially. That single word seemed to terrify Daniel more than anything else. Walter looked at me gently. Mrs. Harper, would you like to open the letter now? He nodded. My fingers shook as I unfolded the envelope. The paper still carried the faint scent of my grandmother's perfume, lavender and cedarwood. I began to read. Claire, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry. I stopped breathing for a second. A lump rose painfully in my throat. My mother died when I was 19, and Eleanor rarely spoke of her. But now her words continued. Daniel is not an evil man, but weak men become dangerous when stronger people whisper in their ears long enough. My eyes lifted instinctively toward Patricia. She looked furious. Give me that, she snapped, stepping forward. Walter's attorney moved between us instantly. No. Patricia froze. She clearly wasn't used to hearing that word. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. This is insane. No, Walter replied calmly. What's insane is attempting to sell property connected to an active trust without understanding the legal structure. Daniel stared at him. What trust? Walter glanced briefly at his attorney, who opened the folder. 6 years ago, the attorney explained, Mrs. Eleanor Bennett quietly transferred a protected ownership percentage in this property after assisting with Mr. Whitmore's financial liabilities. My mind raced backward. 6 years ago, Daniel's construction business had nearly collapsed. We were drowning in debt after 2 bad contracts and a lawsuit. Then, suddenly, everything stabilized. Daniel had told me Patricia helped arrange financing. But now I remembered something else, Grandma Eleanor calling me late one night. Don't worry about the house, she had said softly. I handled it. I thought she meant emotionally. She had meant literally. Daniel's voice cracked. What percentage? Enough, the attorney said, to seriously complicate any unauthorized sale. Patricia exploded. Daniel, what the hell did you sign? There were hundreds of pages, he snapped back. You told me we had to move fast. The silence that followed was brutal. Because in that moment, the truth stood completely naked. They weren't calculated masterminds. They were greedy and sloppy. Walter adjusted his coat, still perfectly calm. Patricia's composure was cracking. She pointed at me furiously. She knew about this. I didn't, I said honestly. But Grandma had. She had been watching quietly for years as Patricia slowly tried to take over our lives. And she had prepared. Daniel looked at me with desperate eyes. Claire, listen, we can figure this out. I laughed softly. Tired, broken sound. 10 minutes ago I was homeless. Now suddenly we exist again. I folded Grandma's letter carefully. You already figured things out, Daniel. Without me. That's not fair, he whispered. Patricia cut in sharply. It was legally his house. Walter looked directly at her. No. That assumption may prove very expensive. Patricia's face went white. The younger attorney closed the folder. At minimum, the buyers were not properly informed about the active trust entanglements on the property. Daniel looked physically ill. Walter spoke gently but firmly. My legal team discovered the issue this afternoon during final review. He glanced toward the house. Now, Walter said firmly, we pause everything before someone makes this worse. Daniel suddenly turned toward me. His voice sharp with accusation. You knew this would happen. I looked at him quietly for several seconds. Then I smiled a small, genuine smile. Because for the first time in years, I said softly, I'm not trapped anymore. Not financially. Not emotionally. Not in a marriage where every decision had to go through your mother first. The realization felt heavy, painful, but also incredibly freeing. Walter motioned gently toward the letter in my hands. There's more. I looked back down and continued reading. Claire, if Patricia is standing nearby while you read this, then I imagine she still believes money makes people powerful. But real power is patience. And people who underestimate quiet women usually regret it eventually. I could almost hear my grandmother's voice saying those words. Patricia looked furious enough to explode. Daniel suddenly seemed smaller, older, diminished. Walter spoke softly. Your grandmother asked me to help if necessary. Why? I whispered. Walter smiled sadly. Because she loved you. That nearly broke me. Not the money. Not the house. Just that the quiet certainty that someone had seen everything happening to me for years and cared enough to protect me. Daniel stepped down from the porch. Claire. I held up one hand. No. He stopped immediately. For the first time in our marriage, he actually listened. Walter suggested we continue the conversation somewhere private. There's a hotel lounge about 5 minutes away. Patricia scoffed. Oh please. We are not sneaking off to some back room over this made-up legal nonsense. But Daniel interrupted her. Mom, stop. The word startled both of us. Not Patricia. Not mother. Just mom. A little boy's voice coming out of a grown man. Patricia looked deeply offended. Daniel looked exhausted. The younger attorney handed Walter another folder while I slowly walked back toward my car. Daniel followed me halfway down the driveway. Claire, wait. I stopped but didn't turn around right away. His voice softened. You know I'd never intentionally hurt you. I closed my eyes for a moment. There it was again, that careful, cowardly wording. Not, I didn't hurt you. Just, not intentionally. I turned slowly to face him. You sold our house while I was at my grandmother's will reading. Daniel's shoulders sagged. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Then how was it supposed to happen? Yes. He opened his mouth then closed it. There was no answer that didn't sound ugly. From the porch, Patricia called out sharply. Daniel. One word. Sharp as a blade. And like muscle memory, he turned toward her immediately. That told me everything I needed to know. The hotel lounge was quiet and dimly lit. Walter had reserved a private corner table near the fireplace. His attorney carefully laid out documents across the polished wood. Daniel sat beside me out of habit. Patricia sat beside him even faster, as if physical distance might loosen her grip on him. I kept Grandma Eleanor's letter folded tightly in my lap. Walter removed his glasses. Before we continue, I want to clarify something. No one interrupted him. The sale itself may not be completely invalid, he said. Patricia smirked. However, he continued, depending on intent, disclosure, and timing, there are several serious legal complications. Daniel rubbed his forehead. What complications? The younger attorney answered plainly. Failure to disclose protected trust interests. Potential financial concealment during marital dissolution. Improper transfer timing. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. You lawyers make everything sound so dramatic. The attorney looked directly at her. No, ma'am. Courts do. That silenced her for a moment. Walter turned to me gently. Claire, your grandmother requested that this second envelope only be opened if you discovered evidence of betrayal involving the property. My stomach tightened. Walter slid the second envelope across the table. My grandmother's handwriting again. For Claire, when the truth finally becomes impossible to ignore. I opened it carefully. Inside was another handwritten letter and several photocopied documents, bank transfers, property records, and emails. I read the first line in silence. Then I looked up at Daniel. You used the money my mother left me. He blinked. What? I lifted one of the documents. You told me we used your savings during the recession. Patricia leaned forward quickly. Claire, now wait a minute. No, I said, cutting her off. I stared straight at Daniel. You used the inheritance my mother left me. He looked trapped, cornered. It was temporary, he muttered weakly. How much? Silence. How much, Daniel? He swallowed hard. Almost all of it. The fireplace crackled beside us while the rest of the lounge carried on with quiet conversations and clinking silverware. My mother had left me $80,000 when she died. Not life-changing money, but hers. Piece of her. And they had taken it. Daniel reached toward me. Claire, I was trying to save the business, Patricia jumped in. And that business fed you for years. Walter calmly slid another document across the table. Actually, he said, the business losses accelerated after several withdrawals connected to Patricia Whitmore's investment accounts. Daniel slowly turned toward his mother. Patricia's face went pale. What? Walter continued. Mrs. Whitmore encouraged several high-risk investments during the same period Mr. Whitmore claimed financial hardship. Daniel stared at her. You said those accounts were protected. Patricia snapped. They were supposed to be. Supposed to be. There it was. The truth finally crawling into the light. Daniel wasn't innocent, but he wasn't the mastermind either. He was simply weak enough to follow the loudest voice in the room. Grandma Eleanor had seen it long before I did. I looked back down at her letter. You cannot save people who willingly hand their conscience to someone else. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. Not for the money, but because I finally understood how long I had been fighting alone for a marriage that Daniel had stopped protecting years ago. Walter spoke gently. Your grandmother didn't want you destroyed financially after the divorce. Divorce. The word sounded different now. Not like death, like release. Daniel whispered, Claire. I'm sorry. For the first time that evening I believed he meant it. But strangely, it no longer changed anything. The strange thing about betrayal is that it doesn't always hit you all at once. Sometimes it arrives layer by layer, until one final truth makes everything collapse. That night in the hotel lounge, I watched 27 years of marriage unravel in under an hour. And oddly enough, I wasn't the one falling apart. Patricia was. You're making me sound like some criminal, she snapped at Walter. Walter remained perfectly calm. I'm making you sound documented. The younger attorney slid another set of papers across the table. Daniel read them carefully. His expression shifted shock, then confusion, then real anger. Not toward me. Toward her. You moved money out of the business account, he said. Patricia crossed her arms defensively. It was temporary. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. That's exactly what I told Claire. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Don't you dare start blaming me for your decisions. There's something else. What? Patricia hired separate counsel this morning. I closed my eyes slowly. Of course she did. She's blaming Daniel, Walter added. I sat quietly beside the fireplace while heavy snow fell outside. Then, unexpectedly, I started laughing, not cruelly, not hysterically, just the tired laugh of a woman watching years of manipulation finally collapse under its own weight. Walter chuckled softly on the other end. Your grandmother predicted that part exactly. I'm not surprised. After we hung up, I stepped outside onto the porch wrapped in Eleanor's old wool coat. The cold mountain air filled my lungs. Everything looked clean, still, and honest. Standing there in the silence, I realized something important. I wasn't lonely. Not even a little. For years I had confused companionship with safety. But real peace comes from no longer having to earn basic kindness every single day. That evening, as the sunset painted the snow in shades of gold and orange, I finally stopped mourning my marriage. Deep down, I had been grieving it for years. 1 year later I stood in Eleanor's kitchen watching sunlight spill across the snow-covered mountains while a blueberry cobbler cooled on the windowsill. The house smelled of cinnamon and fresh coffee, warm, peaceful, and lived in. For a long time, I thought healing would feel dramatic, like a movie scene where everything suddenly makes sense. But healing, for me, arrived quietly in small moments. The first morning I woke up without anxiety twisting in my stomach. The first evening I didn't check my phone waiting for Daniel's mood to decide mine. The first holiday where no one criticized how I cooked, dressed, spoke, or laughed. Tiny freedoms. That's what healing really was, tiny freedoms repeated until they became a life. Outside, fresh snow drifted gently across the property as guests slowly arrived for dinner. Nothing extravagant. Just people who genuinely loved me. Benji carried firewood toward the fireplace while my old friend Mary arranged flowers on the dining table. Walter arrived with 2 bottles of wine and immediately started arguing with Benji about football. Normal things. Good things. The kind I once believed I could create in my marriage if I just tried harder. But some homes never become peaceful because chaos benefits the people creating it. That lesson took me nearly 50 years to learn. Mary walked into the kitchen smiling. "You look lighter." I laughed softly. "That obvious?" "Yes." She kissed my cheek, then lowered her voice. "Have you heard from Daniel?" I nodded. "Twice, actually. The first letter came 6 months ago, full of apologies, regret, and loneliness. The second arrived shortly before Christmas. Shorter. Sadder. He wrote that Patricia barely spoke to him anymore after the lawsuits began. Many friends had disappeared once the scandal spread. The construction business eventually collapsed under legal debt and public embarrassment. In his final paragraph, he wrote, "Your grandmother understood people better than I ever did." I never replied. Not because I hated him. Strangely enough, I didn't. Time had softened the sharpest edges of my anger. What remained was quieter. Acceptance. Daniel wasn't destroyed by one terrible decision. He wasn't destroyed by one terrible decision. He was destroyed slowly by years of weakness. And honestly, so was I, just differently. For most of my adult life, I confused self-sacrifice with love. I believed enduring unhappiness made me loyal. I believed keeping the peace made me wise. I believed forgiving endlessly made me strong. But Eleanor understood something I didn't. Love without respect eventually becomes permission. And permission always invites mistreatment. The front door opened again as Walter stepped into the kitchen, snow still clinging to his shoulders. "Bad news," he announced dramatically. "Benji still believes the Broncos can recover next season." I laughed harder than I had in years, real laughter, the kind that rises naturally instead of being carefully measured. Walter smiled warmly, watching me. Once Marian stepped away, he said quietly, "You know, your grandmother would be very proud of you." That nearly brought me to tears. Not because of the inheritance or the house in Aspen, but because for the first time, I finally believed it was true. Dinner that evening stretched on for hours, full of stories, laughter, and old memories. Mary accidentally burned the dinner rolls and got teased so mercilessly she threatened to leave the table forever. Walter spilled wine on his sweater. Benji cheated at cards without shame. Simple things. Beautiful things. Sitting there surrounded by warmth instead of tension, I finally understood what Eleanor had truly given me. It wasn't just money or property. It wasn't revenge. She gave me clarity before it was too late to rebuild my life. That was the real inheritance. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I stepped onto the porch alone, wrapped in Eleanor's old wool coat. Snow blanketed the mountains under moonlight. The world felt soft and silent. I sat on the porch swing Daniel built years ago. Walter had tracked it down after the house sale collapsed and had it shipped to Aspen, a quiet joke that now felt strangely meaningful. I ran my hand across the worn wood. For years, I thought home was another person. A marriage. A promise that someone would stay. But age teaches harder truths. Sometimes the people you love most become the ones you have to survive. And sometimes losing the wrong people is the first honest step toward finding peace. The cold mountain air filled my lungs as I looked out across the property. Quietly, mostly to myself, I whispered, "For years I begged people to love me the way I deserved. Now I know, real love never asks you to shrink first." The wind moved softly through the trees. Far below, Aspen glowed gently in the distance. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely at home. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever stayed too long in a place that slowly broke your spirit, I hope you remember this. It is never too late to choose peace over performance. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply becoming someone nobody can control anymore. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story touched your heart, I'd love for you to share it with someone who might need the reminder.